getting back to the Kings aren't dead conversation. So here are some breakdowns of teams that were in similar situations and still ended up making a run in the playoffs. Last year, December 3rd, 2023, the Los Angeles Clippers were 9-10 in 10th place in the Western Conference. Like the Kings, they were trying to work a third superstar into their offense, James Harden, with Paul George and Kawhi, and they ended up winning 51 games last season and got the 4 seed in the West. 2 years ago, this is probably the most infamous one. The Los Angeles Lakers were 9-12, same as the Sacramento Kings. They started 2-13. They ended up going to the Western Conference Finals after trading for D'Angelo Russell, Jared Vanderbilt. That feels like the last time Jared Vanderbilt has actually played a basketball game.
Yeah, it was that random series.
Rui Hachimura and a couple others.
Yeah, Lonnie Walker. Remember Lonnie
Walker, the king of the fourth.
20 points in a playoff game. That's still weird that happened. Lonnie Walker scored 20 points in the fourth quarter of a playoff game.
3 years ago, December 3rd, 2021, the Minnesota Timberwolves were 11-12, sitting 10th place in the West. How did their season go? 46 wins, 7 seed in the West, and won a play-in game versus the Clippers, the first time they had advanced in the postseason since 2004, creating the legendary first ballot Hall of Fame meme of Patrick Beverley, jumping up on the table and throwing his jersey into the crowd. Kyle, that's not just your favorite moment. That one is going down in history. The crying, the snot coming out of his nose.
Yeah, you're hugging. Karl Anthony Towns was hugging his girlfriend like he had just won the finals.
Is that the same game? I can't remember when he blows a kiss to the crowd. That's the same game.
So it was against the Clippers, and Patrick Beverley gets this game-winning steal, and then he gets fouled, and he's blowing kisses to the crowd as Minnesota is celebrating their greatest hero. I loved that moment so much. I know it got clowned afterwards, but why do we have to gatekeep this stuff? When the Kings won the play-in game against the Warriors last year, I wanted them to do the same thing. I wanted them to jump up on tables and throw towels and boo Klay Thompson off the floor.
But that was to get into the playoffs, though.
Yeah, so what?
But they didn't get in.
Just do dumb stuff like that. I loved it so much. When the Timberwolves won a play-in game, and Patrick Beverley and Anthony Edwards both jumped up on the table, and Beverly threw the jersey, and they were crying and kissing babies. It was so fun. I loved it so much.
Well, there you have it. Those are a couple examples here just in the last couple of years from 2021, 2022, and 2023, where teams started out even worse than the Kings and ended up turning it around. I think the one that feels the most unrealistic would be the Warriors, or excuse me, the Kings, not the Kings, the Lakers situation, because that was a crazy. They overhauled the whole roster almost at the trade deadline, and that's just not something. Number one, I think is going to happen, and number two, I think is very realistic and sustainable. The Lakers haven't done better since, and everyone thought, well, just give this team a whole season. Didn't work out. But the other two, the Clippers working in Harden, that one to me is the most similar to the Kings. And for them to get all the way to the 4 seed, and they were 9-10, that's the one where I'm thinking, all right, I know the Kings are 9-12, not 9-10, but you can get hot here. Managing to get what you said, they got 51 wins. That's crazy.
Yeah, and this is why I like these 3 examples so much, is that all of the teams started from relatively the same place. We said the Clippers were 9-10, Lakers were 9-12, Timberwolves were 10-11. Like, everyone started from relatively the same place, and each of them did it in different ways to get back into the picture, right? Like, the Lakers overhauled the roster. They got rid of Westbrook. They got rid of a bunch of other. They ended up bringing in D'Angelo Russell. They made all sorts of trades. Meanwhile, the Clippers, they just kind of figured it out by playing together. Mm-hmm. Remember the funny meme of James Harden saying, "When we figure this out, we're going to be scary."
Yeah.
That was right around this time, actually, last year. James Harden said, once we figure this out, we're going to be scary. And they were until they got hurt again. But the Timberwolves one is interesting because I'm looking at that team from that year. It was basically the same starting lineup the whole year. It was D'Angelo Russell, 20-year-old Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, Jared Vanderbilt, Karl Anthony Towns, and then Patrick Beverley, obvious, and Malik Beasley and Taurean Prince and guys like that. But basically, they just kept that group together, and obviously a lot younger than this Kings team, but they eventually just worked through it and climbed their way back into the 7 seed. Now, I know Kings fans might say, oh, it's only the 7 seed. We'd be a play-in team at that point. Well, if the Kings can get to the 7 seed by the end of the season, that means they're going to win probably, 48 games, 50 games in this Western Conference?
Well, that's the other thing as well. Is it time? At what point do we start changing our expectations? Because that's the last thing we wanted. We wanted to be having 4 seed, 3 seed, 4 seed, 5 seed conversations. Our hope was to not be anywhere near the play-in. Even just being 21 games in, again, December is going to tell us a lot about this team.
Or at the very least, when they signed DeMar DeRozan, I was talking to Brennan Nunez about this, and it was kind of like it was a floor raiser for the Kings, right? Like, we didn't expect to be worse than 9th by bringing in DeMar DeRozan, even if it doesn't help the upside of the team. No one thought the floor was going to fall out from under them by adding DeMar DeRozan. So if they get back to 7 or 8, I mean, maybe not by March, but if they get back there by January or February, I mean, you're feeling pretty good about the direction this thing is headed. And a lot of the concerns people have are there. Maybe they still make a trade. Doesn't preclude them from making a trade, but you're still feeling a lot better about the state of things, which I could go back and look also, but I'm guessing that Timberwolves team climbed back to 500 by about January and February. That Lakers team got back to 500 by the end of December. I think the Clippers ran off a win streak in December, so it's like they got back to 500 relatively quickly.
Yeah, I'm looking here just as we're talking about the Timberwolves, and I will say, as we have conversations about Monty McNair and the moves that have been made, You do, I don't know if luck is the right word, but there does come a point where you got to hit on somebody, right? Because I'm looking at the past of one Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and this guy, he's kind of bounced around. He's gotten traded a couple times. He finds his way. He was drafted by the Nets. He was traded by the Nets. This is in 2019 with Alan Crabb and a 2020 first round pick to the Hawks, all right? Then at the next day, he's traded by the Hawks, and he finds his way in New Orleans. So he plays with New Orleans. He's doing his thing in the G League, gets traded from New Orleans, okay, to the Blazers. Then, long story short, he ends up with the Jazz, then gets traded from the Jazz with Mike Conley to the Timberwolves, and he ends up with the Timberwolves. And you're thinking, okay, he was kind of a sweetener along the way. And that guy he was drafted in the first round, 17th pick. This guy's kind of turned into a stud. It's really just, hey, both Jaden McDaniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, they're going to lock you down. We don't necessarily play them at the same time because they do a lot of the same things. But as long as one of them is hitting their shots, we're going to be in the conversation. Now, do the Timberwolves decide that they still need both of them down the line? Who knows? But now you're probably going to get much more back if you ever do decide to move on from Nickeil Alexander-Walker, because there seemed like the Kings that would pray for a guy like that. So I don't know if luck is the right word, but when it comes to some of these dudes that have been sweeteners and ended up just and maybe a part of that is the organization and the growth, and it's both, I would say. But it gets to a point where you got to start hitting on some of these dudes. And I'll give Monty McNair credit I would put Keon Ellis in a similar conversation.
I'll give you the example. So when they traded Marvin Bagley to Detroit, you know who was a sweetener in that deal? It was Trey Lyles. Had 2 years left on the deal.
Yeah.
Had a really good contract year,
right,
and he's still around 4 years later. Marvin Bagley's been traded again, but Trey Lyles is still here.
Right. So I would count that as a win in some capacity. You end up signing with this guy longer term. Now, lately, you haven't been getting what you want to get, but that was a deal where, hey, we got more out of the deal than what we gave away. All right. Can the Kings dig themselves out of this hole? In the next 2 weeks, we go over the games that are coming up. More of your calls, more of your texts, more of your Sac Chat on Sactown Sports.
You never know.